Hi everyone and welcome to Exchange Insights, your Anchor 1031 resource for market intelligence and 1031 education. My name is Tom Wall, partner here at Anchor 1031, and thank you so much for joining us today. This is our first video in a new series called Managing Debt in a DST Portfolio. Today we're going to be discussing a major risk factor associated with portfolio DSTs called a lender cash flow sweep. When one DST owns a portfolio of several properties, the financing used is usually linked to every property in the portfolio. In a move that hedges their risk, lenders build in a mechanism called a cash flow sweep into their loan agreements, and that can severely limit your income and liquidity. So what is this cash flow sweep that lenders build into their loan agreements? Well, it's a mechanism where the lender retains any excess cash flow that's generated by the property and they put it in a lockbox. Technically, this money still belongs to investors, but the lender has complete control over it if certain risk factors are met. And the lender can then direct these funds towards either, paying down the principal of the loan, they can cover other expenses on the property, but they're going to hold any remaining cash to reduce their own risk rather than distributing that money back to investors. While this is going to mitigate risk for the property, it can also severely limit the cash flow that is actually available to investors. So that can impact income streams in scenarios where the property is either underperforming or if they experience a downturn in rental income from market variables or operational challenges. At the end of the day, a situation where the lender has to do a cash flow sweep is going to reduce expected returns and potentially lead to liquidity issues for investors. So what kind of events can trigger a cash flow sweep? Cash flow sweeps are most often going to take place in the following circumstances. Debt service coverage ratio issues. Debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR, is just a fancy way of saying the amount of times the net operating income generated by a property can pay down the debt expense in a year. And lenders are going to have different thresholds, and they might say if you fall below this certain debt service coverage ratio number, based on either expenses increasing on the property or revenue coming down, then that event could trigger a cash flow sweep. Now, even if the property is positively cash flowing, a lender might still collect all the revenue in excess of what you're using to pay down the loan and still put it in that lockbox to cover their risk. Another potential triggering event for this cash flow sweep would be a cross-collateralized portfolio issue. So, if a portfolio of properties is cash flow positive, but only one or two properties stop paying rent, or if the total revenue across the entire portfolio falls below a certain threshold, the lender may still sweep cash flow for the whole portfolio. So this happens because the loan is cross-collateralized by every single property in the same portfolio. We're going to do a deep dive on cross-collateralized loans in a future video. Another potential cash flow sweep trigger is a change to your tenant. So a cash flow sweep could be triggered if a tenant moves out or if they've indicated that they're not going to renew the lease at the end of the term. Even if a tenant moves out early but agrees to continue to pay rent, the lender may still sweep the cash flow. So nothing's even happened yet, but the plan is for them to move out. Lender could identify that as a major risk factor and hedge their bets by sweeping all the revenue and paying down the principal as quickly as possible. Another situation that could occur is if the tenant that you have on the lease continues paying their rent, they have no indication that they're going to be not signing the lease in the future. But if their credit gets downgraded by a rating agency, if they go from a B+ rating, for example, to maybe a B-, that downgrade can trigger the bank to sweep any revenue produced by that property. And they justify it by saying, hey, we lent on a property that had a credit rated tenant of B+. Now we're at B-. That's not what we agreed to. And so it triggers a cash flow sweep. This is riskier than we intended. So we're going to start sweeping the cash flow, paying off the principal of the loan. Now, this situation is strategic for both the lender and for investors. So cash flow sweeps are not all bad. Sometimes property owners agree to a cash flow sweep provision in their actual loan agreements because they want to get lower interest rates in return. Investors tend to use this tactic in a higher interest rate environment where reduction in rates is on the table in the near future. But keep in mind that DSTs are not allowed to refinance, so DST investors should be especially cautious in these situations. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you found this video helpful, and it will hopefully set you up to better understand the nuances of debt that we go into more detail in on a few later videos in this series, again titled Managing Debt in a DST Portfolio. My name is Tom Wall. Thank you so much for tuning in to Exchange Insights, your Anchor 1031 resource for market intelligence and 1031 education. We'll see you next time.